Thank you very much, Müller, for inviting me. Thank you all for your confidence in this presentation, that you dedicate your precious time to my lecture. I understand that, I don't know, is that okay? Do you hear? Maybe I need to get it a little bit higher. Oh. Okay, better? You hear me back there? Yeah? Okay. Anyway, well, I'm happy to be here. I feel privileged to get this attention also by DDD, GGG Gallery, DDD Gallery in Kyoto, who is setting up this wonderful exhibition, and Su Fujimoto-san designing the exhibition. I'm super proud. I said this afternoon it would never happen in Switzerland. I'd never get that attention there, so we have to come over here to kind of feel somehow participating in the history of design and architecture. Anyway, I will talk about my work as a publisher and a book designer, and there is no doubt that I believe in the book strongly, and I also believe in the future of the book, because I consider the book as a 100% expression of analog reality. And that is something we share, you as architects and designers. We depend on physical and analog reality. And I would say, not to be too moralistic, but that the problems this world is in right now can only be solved by analog measures, right? There's no digital device that will take over that task from us. Okay, analog reality. I'll give you just a short impression what analog is. Some of you may remember. We should just be aware that all these sounds are created by analog process and physical energy, power, right? So whether it's the typewriter, which was a great invention of the late 19th century, it made kind of readable and kind of rational writing accessible for individuals. You had portable typewriters, as you got personal computers 100 years later. And I think that's meaningful. It was the mechanical age, the industrial age, and it was the probably one of the very high points of modernity already. The telephone, the same. That was an invention made in 1934, actually, quite late, the kind of individual dial system. And the famous SX70 Polaroid camera, which had this wonderful design, but also this super elegant engine, the very small engine. It's actually only here, very, very small little engine, which made this beautiful sound. It's amazing, it's music. So I am collecting analog sounds for quite a while. And if you imagine, you know, and you watch in your household, you know, how many mechanical instruments make beautiful sounds and create an identity through their sound. And today we get them digitalized on our iPhones and meaningless actually in relation to their function. Okay, we go further. I want to refer to the 20th century as a century with quite many disasters, right? Throughout the century, there were very, very violent disasters, but still the 20th century was probably the one that speeded up the evolution, you know, with help of intelligence and technical measures. And every invention or every ideology was expressed also aesthetically and visually, like futurism. They believed in futurism. And I heard about your creating a term which is tradition future. What was that? Is that tradition future? It's amazing. You know, I never combined these two terms, but they belong together so much, right? So there was a lot of tradition future in the 20th century in the mind of people. And they believe in future, and they believe in evolution and for a better world. And I think what we talk about today is that it's not the technology that makes our future believe. It's really our understanding probably of the world. Modernity went on past the mid-century and had an expression in Ulm, the Hochschule in Ulm. You may be familiar. The architecture of the Hochschule was by Max Bill, a Swiss architect and designer, and somehow he was, I will get back to this one later, there was a kind of a disturbance in 1985, because I want to get straight onward to the book, which for 500 years was the leading medium. You know, without the book we would have no memory, no historic memory at all. It's all collected in books, and I know that, and respectfully learned that in Asia the tradition of written memory and collected and even multiplied memory in writing is much, much older than in Europe. But from 1500 something on, we were capable to multiply our thoughts and print on paper and make them unforgettable in institutions which we call libraries, which are still probably the most precious treasures of knowledge, right? We would not know about Isaac Newton's inventions or Charles Darwin's thoughts and research if they wouldn't have been written on paper. You would have no clue about the canon, the aesthetic and formal canon of Palladio if he wouldn't have had the passion to write these 4 books. And so on. So our aesthetic is kind of, our aesthetical fundament is depending on writing. And in every age, probably, especially in the 20th century, the best of your discipline, the best architects, were forced to write down and to express their thoughts in writing. So was Adolf Loos, as one of the few examples I will mention. Frank Lloyd Wright was a passionate writer. Le Corbusier wrote and edited 39 books throughout his life. 39 books. Imagine how much he believed in the book as a treasure of understanding and knowledge. Aldo Rossi didn't write too much, but very meaningful what he wrote. And now, this is again a disturbing element, you know, this belongs to the other world. I will also get back to that. Or maybe that's time. If we look at this instrument, it doesn't tell us anything. It has no aesthetic in itself, while every book tries to express something of its content. And when this came into my life in 1985, I was 30 years old, and I had been a publisher for 2 years, a designer for 4 years, and I thought, well, will that instrument change my life? And I thought, no, probably not. It may add something to it, but I feel safe with my medium, with the book. And so I kind of was for a while, and now I am again, because in the 90s there was a period where obviously the computer took over and gained your attention much more than the book. But right now I believe that we have a consensus that the book is the lasting memory and the lasting medium, while all the digital devices are very, very useful, helpful, immediate and short-term memory items, right? So if we just agree on that, then you may want to listen to me and my beliefs in the book as a medium, because I want to get into my own activity. So this symbol, which is quite analog, if you agree, right? And it was there for about 3 or 4 years, and it symbolized and it expressed the system collapse on the early Macintosh. And it happened quite often, at least on my device. Well, what does that mean? And again, we realize if you do right, a book will not collapse. You know, the system of the book is probably much more complete and complex than an electronic system can be. So now we leave this and we know what we owe to the computer. At that very moment in the 90s, many publishers thought that the rescue would be in growth. Grow big and you will survive. But we know from this example that it didn't work out. So in publishing, if publishers went for super big books, which needed extra support and were not very handsome, indeed, and if the measure for a book is its weight or its thickness, I think it's not, at least for me, it was not the way I wanted to go. But I didn't want to go for miniature escape as well. So I thought that in my program I want to search, and it's probably something similar to architecture, search for the appropriate form for the content. So it's always a balance between content and its formal expression. And I think it's something that is also deciding or defining good architecture and lasting architecture, at least. So, getting into my practice and how I believe that architecture is best or well communicated through books. First, I trust very much in history. I think history is the treasure to understand present and future, or to generate future and how to anticipate what may come, because we are living in cycles, and sometimes there are kind of violent interruptions, but more or less we can anticipate the next steps, even in new technology. And I believe very much in let's say the avant-garde, or the first third of the 20th century, as a very strong driver of modern understanding and thinking, both in social and in aesthetical terms. And over the years I have been reprinting, re-editing some very precious publications and books of the Russian avant-garde mainly, which some of them may be seen in the show. I just admire the aesthetic and the passion people like Elisitsky or Rodchenko, or also the Bauhaus people, Morinoj, all these guys, and probably you may have similar examples in your culture, but how much they believed in this kind of selective, well-edited, reduced, condensed content brought on paper and multiplied in books. So that made me kind of believe in my profession, despite the disadvantage of the digital revolution. Now, the first book goes back to an initiative by Max Bill in '49. He initiated an exhibition to express, right after the World War II, express the new inventions of technology, new materiality, and also the hope people had in the modern development for a better society, actually. Die gute Form, the good form, in German it also means it's a moral term. Good towards bad, and also morally bad. So it was towards a better world after the suffering years of the war. Now, 30 years after, I was happy to publish this book on this very exhibition of Max Bill, which he initiated in '49. And it shows also how simple, good and influential manifestations can be. There were 88 panels and became very popular because it expressed a new aesthetic. Imagine 1949, how revolutionary this kind of formal canon could be. It went into urbanism as well as in engineering, everyday goods in the architectural context, of course, fashion, transportation. So everything was expressing the same belief in modernity and the same drive which we know from the 50s. The exhibition architecture was pretty smart because it was a traveling exhibition, and he set up this very simple modular system which could be adapted everywhere. Now, dealing with history and going 3 centuries back in history, and if you have ever been to London, you can hardly miss any of Nicholas Hawksmoor's churches. I was happy to participate in this project, which brought together actually an editor which I've been frequently working with, Mohsen Mostafavi, with Helen Binet, a photographer, who I collaborated with first time in 1997, and now again, and she is one of the most passionate architecture photographers in the world, working mainly in black and white. The book is documenting the churches of Hawksmoor, which give a kind of a navigation through London. You can orient yourself in London along the Thames by searching for Hawksmoor churches. But how to do in the book, it was kind of celebrating Hawksmoor's churches and at the same time also be functional towards a professional audience. So Helen's photographs, again, no people, you will discover that, and I will get back to that later. She's kind of emphasizing the architecture, which is the lasting monument, right? I discuss very often with photographers about their attitude to show people or not to show people in architectural photography. And very often I hear the answer, well, the people, they walk away, they pass through the image while the architecture lasts, right? So let's just concentrate on the architecture. We will see whether that is right overall, but beautiful churches. And the book is not a guide book, it's It's a reference book because I believe that photography is the best instrument to represent architecture, even better than video. You know, you may film throughout this church, but it will not give you the edited version view of a person as the selection of photographs can do. So it's a full set of plans, floor plan and facade, and a section through the building for all the 8. You may ask, and I was asked, why these orange drawings? I can only ask back, why not? Right? There is no functional reason. It's a design attitude. It came to mind and it pleased the eye. So
it's beautiful.
It's nice, no? Okay. Another book, and that's the first book. So Hoxmo is the last book I realized with Hélène Binet, and that's the first book, 18 years back, Peter Zumthor. At that time, Peter Zumthor was just at the edge of fame. He just had 2 major buildings realized, beside a few others, which was the spa, the bath in Vals, and the museum in Bregenz. And at that very moment, we decided to do this book together. And it's a quite mystical object, as you will see. But today, even more than back then, I believe it represents very, very well the attitude and the character of the architect. There was 1 or 2 very specific decisions taken, which makes this book quite unique. First, there was this discussion who could write on Zumthor for this book. And luckily, Zumthor couldn't decide because he could choose everyone wanted to write on Zumthor. And because he couldn't decide, I felt challenged to propose to him to write himself. So forget about all of these famous writers and do it yourself, because he was a very passionate writer. And he agreed. So every single word in this book is written by Zumthor himself. Now, when it came to photography, we were observing his archive and we realized that over the 15 years of his projects, the collection of photographs were telling more about the history of architecture photography than about his architecture. So I decided to commission a photographer to re-photograph over 1 summer the 8 or 9 buildings by the time, and that became Hélène Binet. Why? Because she was exclusively black and white in her photographs, no wide angle, no artificial light, right? And this made her probably the most appropriate photographer for Zumthor's architecture at the time. And so I engaged her, and she spent 3 months in the mountains photographing Zumthor's buildings, and the outcome was this precious book. Very little color, just referring to the materiality. All the drawings were the original drawings, some beautiful pencil drawings. And the main work also of the designer and the editor was in structuring and sequencing the images. So it's kind of playing. Back then I didn't know yet, but today it's for me like a symphony by Arvo Pärt. I don't know if you are familiar with Arvo Pärt. Arvo Pärt for me is the most appropriate music alongside Zumthor's architecture or this book. So there was a lot of black ink used to print, especially here. You know, the black represents the mountain of the bath. So the book was very successful. Also, I was almost bankrupt afterwards, but that's just a lack of talent. I went on with Hélène Binet to work on this book for Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid at that time had only realized 2 buildings. One was the fire station at Vitra, which you may know, and the other one was this garden pavilion, also near Basel. And all the rest were only exhibition pavilions or small constructions. So it was the first book on Zaha Hadid's architecture, and we kind of kept it pretty abstract. And again, you see Hélène Binet's photographs with a certain tendency to mystical, dramatic situations. Another book on the project with Zaha. Actually, she was and is the only architect which I may decide to go for one building monographs. One building monographs, I'm very suspicious, right? But somehow with Zaha, it was fun for quite a while. Today it's more difficult because it's a branded studio. I don't know if Zaha is around that much, but sorry?
She's just there.
She's just there,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry.
Anyway, just to say, I think it's important because here I come into collaboration. If you start at a point and you go on, and architecture, you know, or architects, once they are successful, they may kind of disappear somewhere in a sphere where a humble publisher may not reach out for. So sometimes we may just lose track. But I admire the books and her work which we did together. She always forced me to think about the cover as the facade of the book, as she would consider the facade of an architecture. And like a book cover with 5 layers is kind of a stupid thing to consider, to do, but of course you can. So the relief aspect plays a significant role and reflects the relief of the facade. So, and also to play with a 3-dimensional illusion within the book. A lot of Photoshop work in here. This is another book where I actually like the cover very much. Also, I don't like the building, but it's a kind of semantic. I like this 3-dimensional impression, you know, which on a 1.5 millimeter cardboard is quite hard to achieve, but it's okay. Now, I come to the opposite position in architecture photography. When we say, okay, photography is the representation of architecture, then we may say with or without people, and I would say I'm supportive to a younger generation of architecture photographers who may say they don't want to over-celebrate architecture. They want to see it more in a functional and in a social context. And one of these is Ivan Bahn. He told me recently that he has always also been talking here to you, so you may be familiar with him. He wanted to pass by today, but unfortunately didn't find a hotel in Kyoto. Everything is taken by Sakura tourists. I am one. Anyway, so Ivan is one of these photographers who is not afraid of people. You know, I've seen architect photographers waiting behind the camera until the mother with the baby has passed, right? While Ivan is welcoming the lady with the baby, passing and getting into the image, and he will take the image right then. And that's the very difference. So we have done some projects together, and there is more to come, where I think that it really improves the importance also of architecture as a stage for society. You know, it's the stage where we express ourselves, our social beliefs, the community, and ourselves as citizens and the collective of society. And I think that is important. And this book on Chandigarh and Brasilia want to express how this architecture stage in Brasilia and in Chandigarh, these two modernist cities, really work. And it works. So this is Brasilia, and this is Chandigarh. And Ivan is a very fast mover, so he may spend 3, 4, 5 days, but he may go again if he's not happy with the result. And I think architecture, if we really agree that architecture is a stage of life, you know, it's where life is happening, then I think you wouldn't prefer to see this space empty. It's really life with people. Okay, this was Chandigarh. There was another project with Ivan, which was the Torre David in Caracas, Venezuela. A high-rise building which was left after bankruptcy without an elevator, so it became a vertical favela with 3,500 people living and expressing very individual ideas of housing, and they improvised and installed themselves in this modern ruin. Now it's empty, or it's kind of under construction again. It was bought by Chinese government. Well, they actually buy everything now, so there was another project with Ivan Baum, which was a very nice project here in Japan, where we had a chance to spend some time together and fly the helicopter over the island. And again, what would this architecture be without the people? And also what we appreciate about this architecture is that it really shows that stage aspect, you know, to celebrate actually the use. The people give the color, give the meaning, and give the scale also of the building. So again, about Ivan Baum's photographs. What I like is if architecture becomes a second glance discovery in the picture. So you look at these 3 kids, and all of a sudden you see a kind of a building or construction in the background. People make the scale of the image. I think it's very important, and right now I'm very fond of this kind of representation of architecture, because it's taking away a bit of the glamour from the star architects. Okay. So this was Ivan's. Now, so we say that was the representation of architecture. There's another dimension, which is the reflection of architecture. So we have representation of architecture through photography, and we have the reflection of architecture. And this is one example of the delegation, when it delegates the the judgment on architecture to academics. So you kind of allow people to write critical essays on your work, like in this case, Herzog Dömeron. It's in my program, a kind of a rare book where there is a combination of various voices on one topic. And we found a way, together with the editor, we found a way also to allow the architect in by separating his voice. You know, so there was an independent critical essays combined with the voice of the architect, who gave insight in his beliefs and in his collection and his relation to history and to art and so forth and collections, and ending up with a survey over the archive of the architects themselves in a kind of an archaeological attitude, by collecting material and comparing in a empiric way. The cover also comes from a set of models of the Prada building in Tokyo, and made it into this three-dimensional embossing. And again, I emphasize that the deepest point of this three-dimensional embossing is 0.3 millimeter below zero level, and it's embossed with a weight of 7 tons per square meter. So the printing facility was shaking every time. Anyway, so we have expression, reflection, and we have something that is probably my most passionate section here on communicating architecture, which is the imagination of architecture. And how do you want to imagine architecture if you don't draw? Right? I'm absolutely sure that in the design process, drawing is so essential that even if you believe that you can replace drawing by whatever digital process, you know, you will come back to drawing. So stick with drawing, train drawing, and go on with it, and follow the great masters in architecture. And one of them was Louis Kahn, who made this expression, drawing to find out. So it's really the belief that the shortest way from brain to image is through your hand. Right? No shorter way. So, and this book, it is a complete collection of drawings for one project of Louis Kahn. And we were lucky to really show every single step of his architecture. And in the second volume, the more rational informations and materials on the same building. I think it's both. You may have, but because you can't build a house based on your freehand drawings. It has to go through that process of of becoming concrete and precise somehow. And that is shown in this example. Fujimoto-san, who I kind of stole his sketchbook. Well, finally he brought it to Zurich, in fact, after he filled the last page. And I think it's great to see how the hand is kind of linked to your thought. It's kind of a permanent thinking and expressing architecture through your pencil, right? And if you happen to visit the exhibition, you will actually recognize the exhibition or the drawing. There's a familiarity in the lightness of the lines and the it's almost a melody in the composition also of the sketchbook. That was a beginning of observation I made with some contemporary architects. And after Fujimoto-san, and here again to show how close the aesthetic of the architecture or how familiar somehow the architecture looks when you know the drawing. And quite similar with Wang Shu, a Chinese architect, you may know, who is not this kind of constant and intuitive drawing maker. He's more concentrated. He liberates himself every day by writing or drawing calligraphies. When he's ready, he goes into very, very precise, very thoughtful drawings of architecture he had imagined before. So he's kind of visualizing his pre-thought ideas of architecture. And this book shows 7 projects, full set of drawings. And you may say that in the early days of his career, it was just a lack of instruments. He was just far, far away from a computer or from any electronic devices to help him make his drawings. So he was depending on his hands and on his imagination of architecture. And again, I think it's somehow there. There is a relationship between the expression in the drawing and the architecture itself. Stephen Hall, who I happen to publish books with for 15 years now, and he has been making watercolors forever. I think there are several, or 20,000, whatever. It's meaningless to count them, but the watercolor has a very, very reliable technique also to express architectural thoughts and ideas, relatively small format. And there is this saying, not by Stephen Hall, I think it's lent by others, that the time the color takes to dry is the time you need to reflect on your own work, on your own sketch. This is the last book we worked on together, which is one out of, they all have some similarities in the cover of everything, always something embossed, and this is the family of 5 books over 15 years now. And you see the book as an object also in my collection, where I would say, as a publisher, I'm closer to editing than to design, but at a certain point, the designer comes in and takes over and tries to give an expression that is as close as possible and as appropriate as possible to the content. I hate the idea of stupid content in precious form, precious design. Okay, now to get to an end here, I think it's important that we have an understanding of in what relation our activities as designers and architects is standing. I could feel guilty traveling to Japan to talk about books and exhibiting books, but I do not. I do a little bit. But I think it's important that we exchange experience and we exchange beliefs, and then we may go back to our hometown, and that's why I show you Buckminster Fuller, because he taught me think global, act local, that we have to develop a responsibility for the whole, but that the place to be active will probably be much, much smaller and much more effective if we concentrate our activities to a place we think we belong to. You may call it home or whatever. Think global, act local became a slogan for the internet age. Was popular in the 90s, but as a matter of fact, Buckminster Fuller made that expression in 1929. So it's absolutely not, should not be occupied by the digital age, it's part of the analog age. And I just think it should remind us that we are not only architects and designers, we are also citizens. We have a social, not to say political responsibility. And I think we should really find a way to balance, and that's when I try to kind of counterbalance the design and architecture in my program by some more kind of socially relevant contents like human rights, or reflecting on democracy, or on climate change, however, or the question, who owns the water? And well, you may imagine the stupidity of shipping mineral water all around the planet, from Europe to Japan, and from Japan to Europe. What I just believe that, especially for our professions as designers and architects, that we have a social responsibility, and that the more complete we are in our skills and our personalities and our beliefs, the more effective and the more powerful we can act and influence the world. So to bring it down to 3 lines is live authentic, think systematic, and take action. What I mean is find your own identity, define who you are and where you are, understand system, starting from your digestive system and into cosmos and universe, and then you may be capable to take action and within your discipline as architects and designers, and become an effective member of society. Thank you very much.